Hi, my name's Matt Widgery from mattwidgery.com. Now, this episode we're going to be having a look at capturing motion, but it's going to be slightly different. In the last video that we saw, which was the one about the zone focusing, we captured captured an image that was in motion at a cycle race, and what we did was we wanted to freeze the exact moment when that cyclist went over the line and won the race. In that instance, we wanted to keep everything absolutely crisp and clear, so it was really important to get a very fast shutter speed to freeze the motion, and then everything else was about balancing it. So we had a very, very high ISO, because if you remember, the clouds were, it was a little bit of a cloudy day, we didn't have so much light to play with. And then also, because we were zone focusing, we wanted plenty of leg room, so we really wanted basically to get everything in focus. So we kept the aperture very, very tight, very narrow. We were at f16, and what that allowed us to do was to get a very deep depth of field. So everything from basically near to the camera right the way off into the distance was all going to be nice and crisp, so that we didn't have to worry about autofocus and we could just press the button and go. I was at another cycle race last night in Peterborough, part of the Tour series, but I wanted to do something different, something a little bit more artistic. And I wanted to get the sense, not so much of what it looked like to be there, but what it felt like to be there. And I thought a little bit before the shot about what it is that makes professional cycling so dramatic. And to me, it was about the colours, it was about the speed, and it was about the drama. And so I wanted to try and find a way of depicting that pictorially that would convey that sense of the excitement of standing by the side of the road, watching this incredible spectacle of these riders and all the power and the speed and the energy as they went by. So what you can do, and this is a really cool trick, you can actually use effectively two shutter speeds on the same exposure. It sounds weird, but this is how it's done. One shutter speed comes in the standard way. You set the shutter speed, and the shutter, so if it's a one of those type of shutters, focal plane shutters that you get in SLR, it goes up and down. If you've got something fancy like a Hasselblad and it's a leaf shutter that goes in and out like an aperture, you set it to the speed that it wants to do that at, and the faster the shutter speed, the less light goes past. In the sense of movement, the less movement goes past the shutter while it's open, so you get less blur. So in the one we did the other day, when we had thousandth of a second, it went boom very quickly, and so everything was nice and crisp. But what we want to do in this instance is use a much slower shutter speed. And where was actually, on the picture that's up on screen now, I was at a 15th of a second. And you might think that's no use for motion because it's going to blur everything. And you're right, it will. And you can see there's motion that's actually coming into play from two effects here. The blur that you can see behind the riders, that's the blur of the riders physically moving past the camera. But the blur in the background is because I'm panning the camera as well. So the actual, all the background, the trees and the spectators and things like that, they are all blurry. But as you can see also, the rider himself is totally crisp, and you can actually see the faces of the spectators in the crowd as well. How did I do that? Well, obviously 15th of a second and panning and moving and things like that, you're never going to get that. So what you need to do is introduce flash. Now this is really cool. What you've got then, basically when the flash goes off, it's much, much faster than the 15th of a second shutter speed that was being used. In fact, at the shutter power that I was at, it's about 2,000th of a second shutter speed, which is roughly twice what we were even using to capture the race last week. So this is really cool. It means we've got plenty of speed there in order to capture a crisp bit of movement. And what's happening is that as that flash goes off very, very quickly, it's very, very bright, and so it immediately exposes and burns an image onto the sensor of the rider. What it also does, because it's got enough power, is it throws the light across to the other side of the railings there. It freezes the railings nicely, and it freezes the crowd on the other side, so you can get a sense of them watching the race. So that's the flash element. So when you combine the two, so that's the 2,000th of a second, very, very bright, and that's exposed the image that you can see the crisp parts of. And the fuzzy stuff that happened over a 15th of a second, that's because a 15th of a second is what it took to expose for the ambient light that's around, and that picked up on all the motion. So what you get then is all the blur coming in from the trees, the blur coming in from the road, the blur coming in, and the kind of trails that are going off behind the cyclist, which I personally thought was really cool because it gives this real sense of motion and energy and drama. So that's what you do if you want to capture motion, but capture it in a way that you can still kind of see what's going on. Are there other ways of doing this? Well, yes, there are. If you simply want to pan you can do that. So panning the shot, as I said, I was actually moving the camera along with the cyclist. But in this case, I was moving just a little bit slower than the cyclist was going so that I'd still have those trails coming off behind him. But if you want to, and it takes practice to get it, but what you can do is actually pan at exactly the same speed. If you pan exactly the same speed and exactly level, it's important not to move the camera up and down. But if you practice over a few times, you can actually get it so you can track and pan the camera along and leave it perfectly with the movement of the cyclist. And if you do that, then the cyclist will stay relative to the sensor exactly the same and will be in focus and sharp, and everything else behind will be blurry. So that's a really nice way of doing that. But what you don't get with those shots is the crowd and everything behind. All that would be blurry. That would all disappear off into the background. So it depends what you're looking at, depends what you're trying to go for, but that's definitely another way of doing it. The other reason for using the flash is that as well as just being able to hold the shot steady, it does give you more opportunity to really throw that extra little bit of light at the subject and really make the colours and things like that pop. It depends on the ambient light that's available to you, whether or not you need to do that. If you're shooting in the middle of a bright day, you might be okay. But this was in a city, and the race was an evening race, and so the light was just starting to fade, and we were between some buildings, and there were trees overhead, and so the light was quite shadowy, quite dark, and so we needed to really throw light at them because, as I say, for me it was about the energy and the colours and the speed. And the other thing I mentioned was the drama. And the drama, to my mind, comes from being able to see the faces of the participants, of the riders. You want to see them, really sort of grimacing and kind of, focused on what they're doing. You want to see their eyes nice and crisp. And it is really, really hard to get that just with a pure panning shot at 15th of a second with these riders moving past. So in order to, absolutely capture those expressions on their faces, which tell so much of the story, throw a flash at them. And then that crisps that up. So just to recap, if you want to do these shots, you've got a slow shutter speed. That if you then move the camera with the action, but just ever so slightly slower than the action's going, you'll get everything nice and blurry in the background. Throw a flash on it, and then that will just highlight the movement. Now, there's one more thing you need to know. If you go away and do that just with that bit of advice, what you'll tend to find is that the blur from the riders, instead of going out behind them, goes out in front of them. That's no use. What you want is for the motion to look like it's coming from behind them, so it looks like they're leaving a trail in their wake of blurry motion. And the way you do that is to set up your rear curtain sync. What rear curtain sync does is it allows the flash to go off with the rear part of the shutter and not the front part of the shutter. It's a two-plane focal shutter. And that means that the blur will be behind the riders and not in front of it. And it won't look like the riders are kind of moving into their own blur, which just looks weird and wrong. So rear curtain sync, set that up in your camera settings. If it's in the Nikons, there's a little flash menu button on the side of the cameras. It looks like a lightning bolt. If you press that and scroll through with the command wheel on the back, you get to, it says rear and the flash sign, and that's the one you set up for that. Canon users, check your manuals, Pentax, Sony, everything else, check your manuals, it'll be in there, and make sure it's set up on rear curtain sync. Nice low shutter speed, throw a flash at it, and you can get some nice dramatic movement shots. Great, well, thank you very much for watching, hope you enjoyed it, and look forward to seeing you again soon. Cheers.
If you liked that video, click on these videos. You may well like them too. Cheers.